coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor, sending ceramic shards skittering across the tiles like my world falling apart in real time. There on my wife's phone screen, glowing with the harsh blue light of betrayal, was a text message that made my stomach drop into my shoes. "Can't wait to feel you again, baby. Tonight at the Marriott, room 412. Wear the cologne I bought you, Jay." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Will Drayton, 42 years old, senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, and apparently the biggest fool in suburban Chicago. Standing in my granite-countered kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, staring at evidence that my 15-year marriage was a lie, I felt something cold and calculating settle into my chest where my heart used to be. Marta had left her phone on the counter while she showered, something she never did. Her iPhone was usually glued to her palm like a surgical implant. But this morning, fate or stupidity had made her careless, and now I knew why she'd been working so many late nights at the advertising agency. My hands shook as I scrolled through the message thread. Months of exchanges, explicit photos that made my eyes burn. Plans for weekend getaways she'd told me were client retreats. The cologne she'd given me for Christmas, claiming she'd picked it out herself, was apparently meant for someone else entirely. Jake Turnbull. I knew that name. He was some minor local celebrity, a former college football player who now did morning radio and sold insurance. Married to Dana Turnbull, a prosecutor in the district attorney's office. I'd met them both at neighborhood barbecues, watched Jake's cocky smile as he dominated conversations, seen the way Marta's eyes lingered on his athletic frame. The shower was still running upstairs. Steam would be fogging the bathroom mirror, and Marta would be going through her elaborate morning routine, the same one she'd performed for 15 years. Except now, I knew she wasn't just getting ready for work. She was preparing for another day of lies. I grabbed my own phone and started taking screenshots. Every message, every photo, every damning piece of evidence. My financial background had taught me the importance of documentation, and right now I was building a case file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. The water stopped running. I heard Marta's footsteps on the hardwood upstairs, moving between the bathroom and our bedroom. Our bedroom, where she'd been lying next to me every night while planning her next rendezvous with Jake. I deleted the evidence of my snooping from her phone and placed it exactly where she'd left it. Then I swept up the broken mug, dumped the pieces in the trash, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. When Marta walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later, wrapped in her silk robe with her hair still damp, I was sitting at the breakfast bar reading the Wall Street Journal like it was any other morning. "Morning, honey," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that had probably been wrapped around another man's anatomy less than 12 hours ago. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, not looking up from the newspaper. "Big presentation today." She grabbed her phone and checked it immediately, a reflex as automatic as breathing. I watched her face in my peripheral vision, saw the slight smile that crossed her lips as she read something, probably another message from Jake. "I'll be late tonight," she said, pouring herself coffee. "Client dinner." "Which client?" I asked casually. "Henderson Industries. You know how demanding they are." Henderson Industries. I'd helped her prepare for that account 3 years ago. They were based in Milwaukee and rarely required evening meetings. Another lie, delivered with the same tone she used to ask me to take out the garbage. "Well, don't work too hard," I said, folding the paper and standing up. "I'd hate for you to wear yourself out." She looked at me sharply, as if trying to detect sarcasm, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned poker faces in conference rooms full of executives trying to hide their company's financial disasters. Marta's deception was amateur hour compared to that. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my briefcase, and headed for the garage. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw her watching me from the kitchen window. She looked worried, and she should be, because Will Drayton, the boring husband she'd been cheating on, was about to become the most dangerous enemy she'd ever made. The drive to my office gave me time to think. 15 years of marriage, and I'd been faithful every single day. I'd turned down advances from colleagues, ignored flirtations from neighbors, and devoted myself to building the life Marta said she wanted. The house in Riverside Oaks, the luxury cars, the country club membership, the vacation home in Wisconsin, all of it funded by my salary while she played creative director at a mid-tier ad agency. And this was how she repaid me, with lies and hotel rooms and another man's hands on her body. By the time I reached Morrison & Associates, my shock had crystallized into something harder and more focused. I wasn't going to be the victim in the story. I wasn't going to be the cuckolded husband who begged for another chance or quietly accepted divorce papers. I was going to be the architect of consequences, and Marta was going to learn that some safes should never be opened. But first, I needed more information. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal, map out all the players, and identify every pressure point. In finance, we call it due diligence. In revenge, I suppose you'd call it planning. I spent my lunch break researching Jake Turnbull, his radio show, his insurance business, his social media presence. He was exactly the kind of man Marta would find irresistible, confident to the point of arrogance, physically imposing, with a sort of easy charm that made people forget he was essentially a mediocre ex-jock trading on past glory. More importantly, he was married to Dana Turnbull, a woman whose career depended on her reputation for moral integrity. A prosecutor couldn't afford scandals, especially not the kind involving adultery and public humiliation. Jake might think he was playing a casual game, but he was actually sitting on a powder keg. I also looked up Marta's colleagues at the agency. Her boss, Richard Steinberg, was a notorious stickler for professional conduct. The company had fired 2 employees in the past year for inappropriate relationships. If evidence of Marta's affair became public, especially evidence involving explicit communications during work hours, her career would be over faster than a bad commercial campaign. The pieces of my plan began falling into place. This wasn't going to be about screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. This was going to be surgical, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Marta wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that she'd chosen the wrong opponent. That evening, I sat in my home office and organized the screenshots I'd taken that morning. The explicit messages, the photos, the planning conversations. I created encrypted folders, backed everything up to secure cloud storage, and printed hard copies that I locked in my desk drawer. Evidence preservation, lesson 1 from any legal thriller. Downstairs, I could hear Marta getting ready for her client dinner. The shower running again, the hairdryer, the careful selection of clothes. She was putting on a performance, just like she had been for months. But tonight was going to be the last time she lied to my face without consequences. When she came downstairs, she was wearing the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The irony was almost poetic. She'd accessorized it with jewelry I'd given her and perfume I'd purchased during a business trip to New York. Everything about her appearance was funded by my money and chosen to seduce another man. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning slightly to show off the dress. "Beautiful," I said, and meant it. She was beautiful. That's what made this betrayal cut so deep. Jake's a lucky man. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Marta froze mid-spin, her face going pale under her carefully applied makeup. "What did you say?" I looked up from my laptop with the most innocent expression I could manage. "I said you're a lucky woman. Henderson Industries is a great account?" She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for hidden meanings. I kept my expression bland and returned my attention to the computer screen. "I'll be home late," she said finally. "I'm sure you will be." After she left, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my leather chair, thinking. The house felt different now, tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening under my nose. Every room held memories that had been retroactively poisoned. The kitchen where she'd planned her affairs, the bedroom where she'd lied beside me, the living room where she'd probably texted Jake while I watched television. But I wasn't going to let her destroy what I'd built. This house, this life, this future I'd worked so hard to create, none of it was going to be sacrificed on the altar of her selfishness. Instead, I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she'd thrown away and exactly what it was going to cost her. My phone buzzed with a text message from Greg Morrison, my best friend and the son of the firm's founding partner. "Poker night Friday. You in?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Absolutely. I'm feeling lucky." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I told my assistant I had food poisoning and would be working from home, then settled into my office with a pot of coffee and a legal pad. If I was going to destroy my wife's life, I needed to do it properly. First stop, Rena Kowalski, a private investigator I'd met during a corporate fraud case 2 years ago. She was an ex-Chicago police detective who'd gone private after getting fed up with department politics. Tough as nails, smart as hell, and completely without sentiment when it came to cheating spouses. Her office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service, which seemed appropriate for someone who dealt in other people's dirty laundry. Rena looked exactly like Central Casting would order for a female PI. 50-something. Graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a blazer that couldn't quite hide her shoulder holster. "Will Drayton," she said, standing up to shake my hand. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon. What can I do for you?" I handed her a thumb drive containing the screenshots from Marta's phone. "My wife is having an affair. I need documentation. Irina plugged the drive into her computer and spent 10 minutes scrolling through the evidence. Her expression never changed, but I saw her eyebrows rise slightly at some of the more explicit content. "Well, you've already done half my job for me," she said finally. "This is pretty damning stuff. What exactly are you looking for?" "Everything," I said. "Financial records, timeline documentation, evidence of where they've been meeting. I want to know how long this has been going on, how much of my money she spent on it, and what kind of legal exposure I'm looking at." "You thinking divorce?" "I'm thinking nuclear war." Rena leaned back in her chair and studied me with the same intensity she'd probably used to interrogate suspects. "You seem pretty calm for a guy whose world just fell apart." "I'm past the emotional stage. Now I'm in the planning stage." "Those are usually the most dangerous clients," she said, but she was smiling. "Okay, Will, let's burn this thing down. Now, my rate is $500 a day plus expenses. I'll need a retainer." I wrote her a check for $5,000. "How long do you think you'll need?" "Give me a week. Maybe less if they're as sloppy as these text messages suggest." While Rena worked her magic, I focused on the financial aspects of Marta's betrayal. Our joint credit card statements told a story of deception that made my accountant's heart weep. Charges at Victoria's Secret for lingerie I'd never seen, expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together, hotel rooms booked during her supposed business trips. Over the past 6 months, she'd spent nearly $8,000 of our money on her affair. But the real revelation came when I dug into our investment accounts. Marta had been systematically moving money from our joint savings into a personal account I didn't know existed. Small amounts, never enough to trigger my attention, but over the course of a year it added up to nearly $30,000. She'd been planning her exit strategy, building a nest egg for her new life with Jake. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I actually laughed out loud. Marta wasn't just cheating on me, she was embezzling from our marriage. The woman who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me was systematically looting our shared assets to fund her affair. That evening, I confronted her with the subtlety of a master chess player. "Honey," I said over dinner, "I was looking at our investment statements today. Did you move some money around recently?" She didn't even blink. "I transferred some funds to the money market account. Better interest rate." "Which account? I don't see it on our statements." "It's a new account. I haven't added you as a joint holder yet." Another lie, delivered with the same casual ease she'd been using for months. I nodded and changed the subject to her day at work, listening to her fabricate stories about clients and campaigns while I mentally cataloged every deception. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I used her laptop to access her personal email account. The password was our anniversary date, which would have been touching if she weren't using the account to coordinate her infidelity. Her inbox was a treasure trove of evidence: hotel confirmations, restaurant reservations, and exchanges with Jake that made my skin crawl. But the most interesting discovery was an email thread with her sister Linda, who lived in Portland. Marta had been confiding in her about the affair, describing Jake as her soulmate, and me as a financial security blanket. She was ready to discard. Linda had been encouraging the relationship, even offering to let Marta stay with her during the divorce proceedings. The sisterly conspiracy added another layer to my growing understanding of the betrayal. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a midlife crisis. This was a calculated campaign to replace me with someone more exciting, while keeping me around long enough to maximize the financial settlement. I forwarded the most damaging emails to a secure account, then cleared the browser history and closed the laptop. Upstairs, Marta was blow-drying her hair, preparing for another evening of lies. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant another late night at the office and another hotel room rendezvous. But tomorrow was also poker night with Greg and the guys. And Greg Morrison, besides being my best friend, was also one of the best divorce attorneys in Chicago. It was time to start building my legal strategy. Friday evening found me in Greg's basement, surrounded by cigar smoke and the comfortable banter of men who'd known each other since college. Besides Greg, there was Tom Fletcher, a real estate attorney, Mike Sullivan, a criminal defense lawyer, and Dave Chen, a corporate litigator. It was like having my own personal legal dream team. I waited until we were 3 hands into the game before I dropped my bombshell. "Hypothetically," I said, discarding 2 cards, "what would you guys do if you discovered your wife was cheating?" The table went quiet. Tom looked at me with concern, while Mike nearly choked on his beer. "This isn't hypothetical, is it?" Greg said. I shook my head and told them everything. The text messages, the financial deception, the systematic betrayal. By the time I finished, Dave was taking notes on a legal pad, and Mike was already planning strategy. "Jesus, Will," Tom said. "I'm sorry, man. That's brutal." "How do you want to play this?" Greg asked. Divorce is going to be ugly with this much deception involved. I don't want a divorce, I said. Not yet, anyway. I want her to understand what she's thrown away. I want her to feel the consequences of her choices before I decide whether to end the marriage. Mike leaned forward, his criminal defense instincts kicking in. What kind of consequences are we talking about here? Legal ones, social ones, professional ones? I want her affair exposed in a way that destroys her credibility and her reputation. I want Jake's wife to know what her husband has been doing. I want Marta's boss to understand that she's been using company resources for personal business. I want everyone in our social circle to know exactly what kind of person she really is. Dave looked up from his notes. That's not revenge, Will. That's just truth with consequences. Exactly. We spent the next 2 hours planning my campaign of truth-telling. Greg would prepare divorce papers as a backup plan, but wouldn't file them unless I gave the word. Tom would help me protect our assets and document Marta's financial deception. Mike would make sure everything I did stayed within legal boundaries. Dave would handle any corporate implications if Marta's employer decided to take action. You realize, Greg said as we wrapped up the evening, once you start this, there's no going back. Your marriage is over either way. My marriage was over the moment she decided to betray me, I replied. I'm just making sure she understands the price of that decision. Saturday morning, Rena called with her preliminary report. She'd been following Marta and Jake for 3 days, documenting their meetings and photographing their activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Hotel visits, restaurant dates, shopping trips where Jake bought her jewelry with what was probably his wife's money. They're not even trying to be discreet, Rena said. Yesterday they had lunch at a restaurant 2 blocks from his wife's office. Either they're incredibly stupid or they think they're untouchable. Probably both, I said. What about Jake's background? Interesting story there. He's been married to Dana for 12 years, but this isn't his first affair. I found evidence of at least 2 other relationships in the past 5 years. The guy's a serial cheater. Does his wife know? Hard to say. She's smart enough to figure it out if she wanted to, but prosecutors are good at compartmentalizing. She might be choosing not to see what she doesn't want to deal with. That's about to change. You want me to approach her? Not yet. I want to orchestrate this carefully. When Dana finds out about her husband's affairs, I want it to happen in a way that maximizes the impact on both of them. I spent the weekend planning my next moves. Marta was distracted and jumpy, probably sensing that something had changed in our dynamic. She kept asking if I was feeling okay, if something was wrong at work, if I was upset about anything. Each time, I assured her that everything was fine, that I was just tired from the big presentation I'd supposedly been working on. Sunday evening, while she was on the phone with her sister Linda, I made my first move. I created an anonymous email account and sent a carefully worded message to Richard Steinberg, Marta's boss at the advertising agency. Mr. Steinberg, I wrote, I thought you should be aware that one of your employees has been using company resources for personal business. Marta Drayton has been conducting an extramarital affair using her company phone and email, meeting her lover during work hours, and charging personal expenses to company accounts. I've attached documentation that you may find interesting. A concerned citizen. I attached selected screenshots of Marta's text messages, edited to remove anything too explicit but clear enough to establish the nature of the relationship. I also included copies of credit card receipts showing charges to the company card for restaurants and hotels during times when Marta was supposedly meeting clients. The email was scheduled to be sent Monday morning at 9 a.m., right when Steinberg would be reviewing his correspondence for the week. By the time Marta got to work, her boss would be waiting with questions she couldn't answer. But that was just the opening move. I had bigger plans for Jake Turnbull and his prosecutor wife. Plans that would make Marta's workplace embarrassment look like a gentle warning shot. As I went to bed Sunday night, listening to Marta's steady breathing beside me, I felt a strange sense of peace. For months, I'd been living in a world of lies without knowing it. Now finally, I was going to restore the balance. Truth was about to make a comeback in a very big way. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling weather that matched my mood perfectly. I was up at 5:30, sitting in the dark kitchen with my coffee and my laptop, watching the clock count down to 9 a.m. when my email would arrive in Richard Steinberg's inbox. Marta's phone was charging on the counter beside me, silent and innocent-looking, like a loaded gun waiting to go off. At 6:15, I heard the shower start upstairs. Marta's morning routine, as predictable as sunrise. 20 minutes in the shower, 10 minutes on hair, 15 minutes on makeup, 5 minutes choosing an outfit that would look professional to her colleagues and enticing to Jake. I'd been watching this performance for 15 years without realizing it was exactly that, a performance. Today was going to be different. Today, the performance was going to end. At 6:40, the shower stopped. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, letting the darkness of the kitchen wrap around me like armor. This was it, the moment I'd been planning since I discovered her betrayal. The moment when Marta Drayton learned that her husband wasn't the passive, trusting fool she'd taken him for. She came downstairs at 7:10, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who had places to be and people to deceive. She was wearing the navy blue suit I'd bought her for Christmas, paired with the pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's. Even her betrayal was accessorized with my gifts. She flicked on the kitchen lights and stopped when she saw me sitting at the breakfast bar. "Jesus, Will, you scared me. What are you doing sitting in the dark?" "Thinking," I said calmly. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made her freeze. She looked at me more carefully, probably noticing for the first time that I was fully dressed at 7 in the morning, that my laptop was closed in front of me, that I was holding her phone in my hand. "Is that my phone?" she asked. "Yes, it is, along with some very interesting reading material." The color drained from her face. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. "Trip's canceled," I said. "What trip? I don't know what you're talking about." "Room 412 at the Marriott. Tonight at 8. Jake's going to be very disappointed when you don't show up." Marta's knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the edge of the counter for support. "Will, I can explain." "No need to explain. It's all very clear. 6 months of hotel rooms, restaurant dates, and shopping trips. All paid for with our money, of course. Jake's not just getting my wife, he's getting her at my expense." She started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want my phone back, and I want to know what gives you the right to—" "Sit down, Marta." There was something in my voice that made her obey. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down heavily, her hands shaking. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, placing her phone on the counter between us. "You're going to give me the passwords to all your accounts, email, social media, banking, everything. You're going to hand over your laptop. And you're going to lift up your dress." "What?" "You heard me. Lift up your dress. I want to see what you're wearing underneath. I have a feeling it's not the cotton underwear you usually put on for work." "I'm not going to—" "You are, or I'm going to forward every single text message, every photo, and every email to Richard Steinberg right now. I'm also going to send them to the Chicago Tribune's gossip columnist, your mother, and every person in your contact list. Your choice." Marta's face crumpled. Tears started streaming down her carefully applied makeup, leaving dark tracks on her cheeks. But she stood up and slowly lifted the hem of her dress. Red lace, a matching set that I'd never seen before, probably purchased with our joint credit card for Jake's viewing pleasure. "Very nice," I said, taking a photo with my own phone. "Jake has expensive taste. Too bad he won't be seeing it tonight." "Please, Will, I know how this looks, but—" "I know how it looks, too. It looks like my wife has been sleeping with another man for 6 months while lying to my face every single day." My voice was still calm, conversational even, which seemed to scare her more than shouting would have. "It's not what you think. It's not just physical. Jake and I, we have a connection. We understand each other in ways that you and I never have." "A connection? How romantic. Does his wife know about this connection?" Marta's eyes widened. "You can't tell Dana. She's a prosecutor. It would ruin Jake's life." "That's the idea." I opened my laptop and showed her the screen. It was an email draft addressed to Dana Turnbull at the district attorney's office, with attachments containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered about her husband's affair. "One click," I said, "and Dana gets to see exactly what kind of man she married, along with photographic evidence and a complete timeline of his activities. I imagine that would be very embarrassing for a prosecutor whose career depends on her reputation for moral integrity." "You wouldn't—" "Try me." Marta stared at the screen, then at me. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand what you've thrown away. I want you to feel the consequences of your choices. And I want you to know that your life as you've known it is over." I clicked send on the email to Dana, then opened another draft. "That was your lover's wife. This one goes to your boss. Screenshots of your text messages, documentation of your hotel visits during work hours, and copies of the receipts showing you've been charging personal expenses to the company credit card. Richard will fire me. Yes, he will, probably today." I sent that email too, then opened a third draft. "And this one goes to your mother. All those photos you've been sending to Jake, along with some of his more colorful responses. I think Magda will be particularly interested in the one where you're wearing her grandmother's pearls while describing what you want to do to another woman's husband." "Please don't send that to my mother. She'll disown me." "She should. You're a disgrace to the family name." I sent the third email, then closed the laptop. "All done. By 9 o'clock this morning, everyone important in your life will know exactly what kind of person you really are." Marta collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Why are you doing this to me?" "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just sharing the truth. You did this to yourself the moment you decided to betray our marriage." "I never meant for it to happen. It just did." "Bullshit. This wasn't an accident. You've been systematically lying to me for months. You've been stealing money from our joint accounts. You've been planning your exit strategy while pretending to be my loving wife. This was calculated, deliberate, and cruel." I stood up and walked around the table to where she was sitting. She flinched as I approached, but I just placed my hands on the back of her chair and leaned down to whisper in her ear. "But here's the thing, Marta. I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, you're going to wish you'd never met Jake Turnbull. You're going to wish you'd never betrayed me, and you're going to understand that there are consequences for destroying someone who loved you." I straightened up and walked back to my side of the table. "Now, you have two choices. You can go upstairs, pack a bag, and leave this house forever. Or you can stay, play the role of the repentant wife, and hope that someday I might consider forgiving you. But either way, your affair is over. Jake's life is about to become very complicated, and yours is about to become a living hell. What if I choose to leave? Then you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. I'll freeze all our joint accounts, file for divorce on grounds of adultery, and make sure you don't get a penny of my money in the settlement. You can go live with your sister Linda in Portland and start over with whatever Jake is willing to give you, assuming his wife doesn't take him for everything he's worth in their divorce. And if I stay? If you stay, you follow my rules. You go where I tell you to go, do what I tell you to do, and say what I tell you to say. You become the perfect wife, at least in public. And maybe, eventually, I'll decide whether our marriage is worth saving." Marta looked at me with a mixture of fear and hatred that was almost satisfying. "You're enjoying this?" "Yes, I am. For 6 months, you've been enjoying yourself at my expense. Now it's my turn." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara even more. "I'll stay." "Good choice. Now go upstairs and fix your makeup. You're going to work today, and you're going to face whatever Richard Steinberg has to say to you. You're going to apologize, beg for your job, and accept whatever consequences he decides to impose. And tonight, you're going to come home and tell me exactly how it went." She stood up slowly, like an old woman. "What about Jake?" "Jake is no longer your concern. You're going to text him right now and tell him the affair is over. You're never going to see him again, speak to him again, or think about him again. He's about to have much bigger problems than losing his married girlfriend." I handed her the phone. She took it with trembling fingers and typed out a message. "It's over. Don't contact me again. My husband knows everything." "Send it," I said. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed send. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed with Jake's response. "What are you talking about?" I took the phone back and typed a reply. "This is Will Drayton, Marta's husband. Your wife will be receiving some interesting emails this morning. I suggest you lawyer up." Jake's response came back immediately. "You bastard." I showed the message to Marta, then deleted the entire conversation thread. "And that's the last time you'll ever hear from your soulmate. Now go get ready for work. You have a very interesting day ahead of you." She walked toward the stairs like she was heading to her own execution. At the bottom step, she turned back to me. "I did love you, Will. I still do." "No, you don't. You love the security I provided and the lifestyle I made possible. But you never loved me enough to stay faithful, and you never respected me enough to be honest. That's not love, Marta. That's just convenience." She started to respond, but I held up my hand. "Go to work. Face the consequences. And remember, this is just day one. Things are going to get much worse before they get better." As she disappeared upstairs, I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I had emails to send, phone calls to make, and a reputation to destroy. Jake Turnbull was about to learn that stealing another man's wife came with a price tag he couldn't afford. And Marta was about to discover that betraying someone who loved her was the biggest mistake of her life. The kitchen was quiet again, but it felt different now. The lies had been exposed, the truth had been spoken, and the consequences were in motion. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. It was going to be a very interesting day. By 10:30 that morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call came from Richard Steinberg himself, Marta's boss at the advertising agency. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Drayton, I need to speak with you about your wife's employment situation." "I figured you might," I said calmly. "I assume you received my email." "I did. And I have to say, this is one of the most disturbing situations I've encountered in 20 years of running this company. using company resources for personal affairs, charging personal expenses to corporate accounts, conducting inappropriate relationships during work hours, it's grounds for immediate termination. I understand completely. What do you need from me? Documentation. If we're going to fire her for cause, I need everything you can provide. Text messages, receipts, timeline evidence. Our legal department wants to make sure we're covered in case she tries to claim wrongful termination. I spent the next hour on the phone with Steinberg and his lawyers, walking them through the evidence I'd gathered. By the end of the conversation, Marta's career in advertising was effectively over. Word would spread through the industry within days, and no reputable agency would hire someone who'd been fired for conducting affairs on company time. The second call came from Dana Turnbull. Her voice was ice-cold professional, the tone of a prosecutor who'd just discovered a new case. Mr. Drayton, I received your email this morning. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the situation. Of course. When and where? My office, 2 o'clock today. And Mr. Drayton, bring everything you have. Dana's office in the district attorney's building was exactly what I'd expected. Diplomas on the walls, law books on the shelves, and the kind of organized efficiency that came with prosecuting criminals for a living. She was an attractive woman in her early 40s, with steel gray eyes and the kind of controlled demeanor that probably made defense attorneys nervous. Yeah, thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I have to say, your email was quite illuminating. I thought you should know what your husband has been doing. How long have you known about the affair? I discovered it 3 days ago, but based on the evidence I've gathered, it's been going on for at least 6 months. She nodded, making notes on a legal pad. And this isn't Jake's first extramarital relationship? According to my private investigator, he's had at least 2 other affairs in the past 5 years. Apparently your husband has a pattern of behavior. Dana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. And what exactly do you want from me, Mr. Drayton? Nothing. I just thought you deserved to know the truth about the man you're married to. The truth. She leaned back in her chair and studied me with the same intensity she probably used on hostile witnesses. You realize that destroying my marriage doesn't undo the damage to yours. I'm not trying to destroy your marriage. I'm just sharing information. What you do with it is your choice. But you are trying to destroy my husband. Your husband destroyed himself the moment he decided to sleep with my wife. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that decision. Dana was quiet for a long moment, then opened a file folder on her desk. I've been married to Jake for 12 years. I've suspected his infidelity for at least half that time, but I chose to ignore it for the sake of our stability. Prosecutors can't afford messy personal lives, and divorce would have been complicated. And now? Now I have documentation that makes ignoring it impossible. Jake has been using our joint credit cards to fund his affairs, which constitutes financial fraud. He's been lying under oath about his whereabouts, which could affect cases where his testimony was material, and he's been conducting these relationships while representing himself as a family man, which could constitute consumer fraud in his insurance business. I felt a cold smile spreading across my face. Sounds like he's in serious legal trouble. He will be. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I'm going to make sure he loses everything. His business, his reputation, his financial assets, all of it. By the time I'm done with Jake Turnbull, he'll be lucky to find work selling used cars. What about Marta? Your wife is a victim in this situation, Mr. Drayton. Jake pursued her, manipulated her, and used her for his own gratification. I don't hold her responsible for my husband's predatory behavior. I laughed, a sound that made Dana raise her eyebrows. With all due respect, Mrs. Turnbull, you don't know my wife very well. Marta wasn't a victim. She was a willing participant who knew exactly what she was doing. Perhaps, but legally speaking, she's not my concern. Jake is. As I left Dana's office, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Jake's life was about to become a legal nightmare, and he'd brought it entirely on himself. But Dana was wrong about one thing. Marta wasn't going to escape consequences just because she was technically the other woman rather than the cheating spouse. I had plans for Marta that would make her wish she'd never heard Jake Turnbull's name. That evening, I was waiting in the living room when Marta came home from what had obviously been the worst day of her professional life. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair was disheveled, and she looked like she'd aged 5 years in 8 hours. How did it go? I asked pleasantly. She collapsed into the armchair across from me. They fired me. Richard called me into his office at 9:30 and terminated me immediately. Security escorted me out of the building like I was a criminal. I'm sorry to hear that, although I can't say I'm surprised. They're also going after me for the money I charged to the company card. They want full restitution plus penalties. It's going to be almost $15,000. That's unfortunate. I hope you have that much in your personal account. She looked at me with desperation. You know I don't. Will, please. I know I made mistakes, but I can't pay that back without help. They're threatening to file criminal charges if I don't pay within 30 days. Then you'd better start looking for a new job quickly. Who's going to hire me? Richard is telling everyone in the industry what happened. I'm blacklisted. I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. You made these choices, Marta. Now you get to live with the consequences. She started crying again, the kind of desperate sobs that came from someone whose world was collapsing in real time. What about Jake? Have you heard from him? No, but I imagine he's having an interesting conversation with his wife right about now. Dana seemed very motivated to make sure he pays for his infidelity. You told his wife? I told his wife everything. Text messages, photos, timeline, financial records, the complete package. She's filing for divorce tomorrow and pursuing criminal fraud charges. Jake's about to lose his business, his house, and his reputation. Congratulations, Marta. You picked a real winner. The color drained from her face. Criminal charges? Apparently, using joint credit cards to fund extramarital affairs constitutes financial fraud. Who knew? And since Jake's been lying about his activities under oath in various legal proceedings, he's also looking at perjury charges. Dana's a very thorough prosecutor. Marta buried her face in her hands. This is a nightmare. No, this is justice. You and Jake thought you could betray your spouses without consequences. You were wrong. I stood up and walked over to where she was sitting. But here's the thing, Marta. Jake's problems are just beginning, and so are yours. Because tomorrow, I'm going to start phase 2 of your education in consequences. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What's phase 2? Social destruction. Everyone in our neighborhood, everyone at the country club, everyone in our social circle is going to know exactly what kind of person you are. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to show your face anywhere in this city without people whispering about what you did. Will, please. I get it. I understand that I hurt you, but this has gone far enough. Can't we try to work things out? Can't we go to counseling or something? I laughed, the same cold sound I'd made in Dana's office. Counseling? You want to go to counseling? After 6 months of systematic betrayal, financial theft, and pathological lying, you think a few therapy sessions are going to fix this? I'm willing to try anything. I love you, Will. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do love you. You love my money. You love the security I provide. You love the lifestyle I've made possible. But you don't love me, Marta. If you loved me, you never would have done this. I walked back to my chair and sat down. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to start looking for any job you can find. Retail, food service, cleaning offices, whatever will pay you enough to cover your share of the household expenses and start paying back the money you stole from your employer. My share of the expenses? Did you think I was going to keep supporting you after what you've done? You're going to pay for your own food, your own clothes, your own gas, and half of the household bills. You're also going to pay me back the $8,000 you spent on your affair, plus interest. I can't afford all of that on a minimum wage job. Then you'd better find 2 minimum wage jobs, or 3. I really don't care how you manage it, as long as you manage it. She stared at me with a mixture of shock and growing understanding. You're not going to divorce me. Not yet. Divorce would be too easy for you. You'd get half of our assets, spousal support, and the chance to start over somewhere else. I'm not going to reward your betrayal with a financial settlement. Then what do you want? I want you to understand what you threw away. I want you to experience the consequences of your choices. And I want you to spend every day for the foreseeable future regretting what you did to our marriage. I stood up and headed for the stairs. Oh, and Marta, tomorrow morning I'm having the locks changed on the house. You'll get 1 key, and if you lose it or make copies, you'll be sleeping in your car. I'm also having a security system installed with cameras in every room except the bathrooms. I want to make sure you're not tempted to do anything else stupid. You're going to spy on me in my own home? This isn't your home anymore. This is my home where you're living as a guest, and guests follow the rules or they get asked to leave. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear her crying behind me, but I felt no sympathy, no regret, no impulse to comfort her. Marta had made her choices, and now she was going to live with them. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations, new consequences, and new reminders of what her betrayal had cost her, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. After all, revenge was supposed to be satisfying, and so far, it was exceeding my expectations. 3 weeks later, Marta was working double shifts at a discount clothing store in a strip mall 20 miles from our neighborhood. The commute in her 10-year-old Honda Civic took an hour each way, and she was making barely enough money to cover her share of the expenses I'd imposed on her. The woman who'd once managed million-dollar advertising campaigns was now folding clearance dresses for $12 an hour. But that was just the financial component of her punishment. The social destruction had been far more comprehensive and infinitely more satisfying. It started with our neighbor Sharon Kellerman, the self-appointed queen of Riverside Oaks gossip. I'd invited her over for coffee and, with apparent reluctance, shared the difficult situation I was dealing with regarding Marta's infidelity. Sharon's eyes had lit up like Christmas morning as I provided carefully edited details about the affair, the financial deception, and Marta's termination from her job. "I had no idea," Sharon said, though her tone suggested she was delighted to finally have confirmation of what she'd probably suspected for months. "Poor Will. How are you holding up?" "It's been challenging," I said with exactly the right amount of wounded dignity. "I'm trying to decide whether the marriage can be salvaged, but the betrayal runs so deep." Within 24 hours, every person in our social circle knew about Marta's affair. The story grew in the telling, as gossip always does, until Marta was being portrayed as a predatory homewrecker who'd seduced an innocent married man and stolen thousands of dollars from her employer to fund lavish shopping sprees. The country club was the most brutal venue for Marta's social execution. When she accompanied me to the monthly dinner dance, thinking that maintaining appearances might help her situation, she was met with a wall of cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Women who'd been her friends for years suddenly had urgent business elsewhere when she tried to join their conversations. The final blow came when Margaret Pemberton, the club president's wife, approached our table during dinner. "Marta, dear," she said with the kind of false sweetness that preceded social assassination, "I wanted to let you know that the membership committee has decided to suspend your volunteer privileges pending resolution of your situation. We simply can't have someone with questionable moral character representing the club at charity events." Marta's face went white. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all. We've heard quite detailed accounts of your behavior, and frankly, it's not the kind of example we want to set for the younger members." After Margaret walked away, Marta turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Did you know this was going to happen?" "I had a feeling it might," I said, cutting my steak with deliberate precision. "Actions have consequences, Marta. You're just beginning to understand what those consequences look like." But the country club humiliation was nothing compared to what happened when Jake Turnbull finally decided to make his desperate play for redemption. It was a Thursday evening, and I was in my home office reviewing financial reports when the doorbell rang. Marta was at work, pulling her second shift of the day, so I answered it myself. Jake stood on my front porch, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. Dana's legal assault had been even more devastating than I'd hoped. She'd frozen all of Jake's accounts, filed for divorce with a demand for full asset forfeiture, and convinced the district attorney's office to pursue fraud charges related to his misuse of joint credit cards. His insurance business was under investigation, his radio show had been canceled, and he was facing the possibility of actual jail time. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What's on your mind, Jake?" "You've destroyed my life." "You destroyed your own life when you decided to sleep with my wife. I just made sure there were consequences." He was bigger than me, more athletic, and probably capable of doing serious physical damage if he decided to get violent. But he looked broken, defeated, like a man who'd finally realized the full scope of what he'd lost. "Dana's going to take everything. The house, the business, the cars, all of it. She's also pushing for criminal charges that could put me in prison for 5 years. Sounds like you should have thought about that before you started your affair." "It wasn't supposed to go this far. It was just supposed to be fun, something exciting. I never meant to hurt anyone." I laughed, the same cold sound that had become my signature response to expressions of regret from the people who'd betrayed me. "You never meant to hurt anyone? What did you think was going to happen, Jake? Did you think you could sleep with another man's wife indefinitely without consequences?" I thought if we were careful, if we were discreet." "You thought you were smarter than everyone else? You thought you were entitled to take whatever you wanted without paying the price? You were wrong." Jake's shoulders sagged. "What do you want from me? Money? An apology? I'll do whatever you want. Just call off your wife. Tell her to back down on the criminal charges." "Dana isn't my wife, Jake. She's your wife. And she's doing exactly what any intelligent woman would do when she discovers her husband has been systematically betraying her for years." "Years? It wasn't years. The thing with Marta only lasted 6 months." "But Marta wasn't your first affair, was she? Dana told me about the others. She's been building a case against you for a long time, and my evidence just gave her the ammunition she needed to pull the trigger." The realization dawned on his face slowly. She knew. She knew about the others. She suspected. But suspicion isn't proof, and Dana's a prosecutor. She needed evidence that would hold up in court. Thanks to your affair with Marta, she now has more evidence than she knows what to do with. Jake's face crumpled. "My life is over." "Yes, it is. You're going to lose your house, your business, and probably your freedom. You're going to be a middle-aged ex-convict with no money, no prospects, and a reputation that will follow you wherever you go. Congratulations, Jake. You traded all of that for 6 months with my wife." "Was it worth it?" he asked desperately. "Destroying 2 marriages, ruining 4 lives. Was your revenge worth all of that?" I considered the question seriously. "You know what, Jake? It really was. Because you didn't just sleep with my wife. You made me look like a fool. You made me the cuckold who was too stupid to see what was happening in his own marriage. You took something that belonged to me and used it for your own gratification. Marta doesn't belong to you. She's not property. No, she's not property. But she was my wife, and that meant something. It meant loyalty, fidelity, and respect. You helped her violate all of those commitments, and now you're both going to pay the price." Jake turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "What about Marta? What's going to happen to her?" "Marta's going to spend the next few years learning what it means to live without the security and comfort I provided. She's going to work minimum wage jobs, live paycheck to paycheck, and be reminded every single day of what her betrayal cost her. And then? And then, maybe, if she's learned her lesson and if I decide she's suffered enough, I might consider forgiving her. Or I might decide that some betrayals are unforgivable and file for divorce. I haven't made up my mind yet." "You're a cold bastard, Will." "No, Jake. I'm just a man who refuses to be victimized without consequences. You and Marta thought you could betray me and walk away unscathed. You were wrong." After Jake left, I went back inside and poured myself a bourbon. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since I'd discovered Marta's affair. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in complete control of my life and my circumstances. An hour later, Marta came home from her evening shift, exhausted and defeated. She looked at me sitting in my leather chair with my drink and my newspaper, and I saw something like hatred flash in her eyes. "Jake came by," I said, without looking up from the financial section. She froze in the doorway. "What did he want?" "To beg me to call off Dana's legal assault. Apparently, he's finally realized that actions have consequences." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that his problems were his own fault and that he should have thought about the consequences before he decided to sleep with you." Marta walked over to the bar and poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. "How long is this going to go on, Will?" "How long is what going to go on?" "This. The punishment, the humiliation, the constant reminders of what I did. How long before you either forgive me or divorce me?" I folded my newspaper and looked at her directly. "That depends entirely on you, Marta. When I'm satisfied that you understand the full scope of what you threw away, and when I'm convinced that you've learned your lesson, then I'll make a decision about our future." "And how will you know when that happens?" "I'll know." She drank her wine in silence for several minutes, then set down the glass and looked at me with something approaching her old defiance. "You know what, Will? You're right. I did betray you. I did lie to you. I did steal money from our joint accounts and spend it on another man. I did all of those things, and I deserve to be punished for them." "Yes, you do. But you know what else? You're enjoying this too much. You're taking too much pleasure in my suffering. That's not justice, Will. That's cruelty." I stood up and walked over to where she was standing. "You want to know what cruelty is, Marta? Cruelty is lying to someone who loves you every single day for 6 months. Cruelty is stealing money from your joint accounts to fund an affair. Cruelty is making your husband look like a fool while you laugh about it with your lover. I never laughed about you with Jake. Bullshit. I read your text messages, remember? I saw what you said about me, about our marriage, about how boring and predictable I was compared to your exciting new boyfriend." Her face reddened. Those were just things I said in the heat of the moment. No, they weren't. They were your true feelings, expressed when you thought no one would ever see them, and now I know exactly what you really think of me. So what happens now? I walked back to my chair and sat down. Now you go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for another day of minimum wage work and social ostracism. And I continue to decide whether you're worth the effort of forgiveness. And if you decide I'm not, then you'll find out what it's like to start over with nothing but the clothes on your back and the reputation you've earned. Marta stared at me for a long moment, then turned and headed for the stairs. At the bottom step, she paused and looked back. I did love you, Will. Despite everything, I did love you. No, Marta, you loved what I could give you. You loved the security, the comfort, the lifestyle. But you never loved me enough to be faithful, and you never respected me enough to be honest. That's not love. That's just selfishness with better marketing. As she disappeared upstairs, I returned to my newspaper and my bourbon. Outside, it was starting to rain, the kind of steady downpour that would wash the streets clean and leave everything looking fresh and new in the morning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new opportunities to remind Marta of the price of betrayal. But tonight, I was content to sit in my chair, in my house, surrounded by the life I'd built, and the control I'd reclaimed. Jake Turnbull was facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Marta was working retail jobs and living as a social pariah, and I was exactly where I belonged, in complete control of the consequences of their betrayal. It had been a very satisfying few weeks, and I had a feeling the best was yet to come. 6 months after the kitchen confrontation that changed everything, I sat in my lawyer's office reviewing the final divorce papers. Greg Morrison looked across his mahogany desk at me with the expression of someone who'd watched his best friend navigate the most methodical destruction of a marriage he'd ever witnessed. Are you sure about this, Will? He asked. After everything you've put her through, Marta might actually have learned her lesson. She's been working 2 jobs, paying you back, and she hasn't so much as looked at another man. She's learned not to get caught, I corrected. That's not the same thing as learning her lesson. The truth was more complicated than I was willing to admit to Greg. Over the past 6 months, I'd watched Marta transform from the entitled, deceptive woman who'd betrayed our marriage into someone who understood the value of hard work and the cost of betrayal. She'd paid back every penny she'd stolen from me and her former employer. She'd endured the social ostracism with a dignity I hadn't expected, and she'd never once complained about the consequences I'd imposed on her. But every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who'd lied to my face for 6 months while planning her exit strategy. Every time she spoke, I heard the voice that had whispered sweet lies to another man. Every time she touched me, I felt the hands that had betrayed our marriage vows. Some betrayals, I'd learned, were simply unforgivable. The papers are ready, Greg said. No-fault divorce, equal division of assets. She'll get half of everything, plus spousal support for 3 years. She'll get exactly what the law requires, and not a penny more. Will, she's been through hell. Don't you think? She put herself through hell when she decided to cheat on me. I just made sure she understood the consequences. Greg signed the papers and slid them across the desk. You've changed, you know. This whole experience has made you harder. No, Greg, this experience has made me smarter. I spent 15 years trusting someone who didn't deserve it. I won't make that mistake again. That evening, I found Marta in the kitchen, preparing dinner after her shift at the department store. She'd lost weight over the past 6 months, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The woman who'd once spent hundreds of dollars on salon treatments and designer clothes was now shopping at thrift stores and cutting her own hair. We need to talk, I said, placing the divorce papers on the counter. She looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. I've been expecting this. Have you? You've had your revenge, Will. You've made me pay for what I did in every way possible. I didn't think you'd want to stay married to someone you despise. I don't despise you, Marta. I despise what you did. There's a difference. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd confronted her 6 months ago. What happens now? Now you sign the papers, and we both move on with our lives. You'll get half of our assets, which should be enough to start over somewhere else. I'd recommend Portland. Your sister Linda is still willing to take you in, and no one there knows about your affair. What about you? What will you do? I'll sell this house and buy something smaller. Maybe travel for a while. I've got some vacation time saved up. She picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them slowly. Equal division of assets. That's more generous than I expected. It's what the law requires. Nothing more, nothing less. Will, I know you'll probably never believe this, but I am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I did to you, to us, to our marriage. You didn't deserve any of it. I sat down across from her, studying her face for signs of deception, but all I saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. Why, Marta? After 15 years, why did you throw it all away? She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. I felt invisible, like I was just going through the motions of being your wife without actually living. Jake made me feel alive again, made me feel desirable and exciting. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. You could have talked to me. We could have gone to counseling, taken a vacation, done something to reconnect. Instead, you chose to betray me. I know, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life. She signed the papers with steady hands, then slid them back across the table. There, it's done. It was done 6 months ago, Marta. This is just making it official. We sat in silence for several minutes. 15 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents and a kitchen table conversation. I heard about Jake, she said finally. Jake Turnbull's downfall had been even more spectacular than I'd hoped. Dana's legal assault had destroyed him financially and professionally. He'd been convicted of fraud and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. His insurance business had been liquidated to pay his debts, and he'd lost his house, his cars, and his reputation. The last I'd heard, he was working in a prison kitchen and would be eligible for parole in 6 months. What about him? Dana divorced him and took everything. He's in federal prison, and when he gets out, he'll have nothing. No money, no business, no prospects. His life is completely ruined. Yes, it is. Was it worth it? Destroying him so completely? I considered the question. Jake made a choice when he decided to pursue you. He knew you were married, knew he was married, and knew that affairs have consequences. He chose to take the risk, and now he's paying the price. But don't you feel any sympathy for him? Any regret about what happened? No, I don't. Jake got exactly what he deserved. So did you. Marta flinched as if I'd slapped her. I deserved to lose my job, my friends, my reputation, and my marriage. You deserved the consequences of your choices. If those consequences were severe, it's because your betrayal was severe. And now? Do you feel like justice has been served? I thought about the question seriously. Over the past 6 months, I'd watched both Marta and Jake pay the price for their betrayal. Jake had lost everything and was sitting in a federal prison. Marta had lost her career, her social standing, and now her marriage. Their affair had cost them both more than they'd ever imagined possible. Yes, I said finally, justice has been served. Then why don't you look satisfied? Why do you look like a man who's won a war but lost something important in the process? It was a perceptive question, and one I'd been avoiding asking myself. The truth was that my revenge had been complete and devastating, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I'd expected. I'd destroyed 2 lives and ended my marriage, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Because, I said slowly, winning doesn't always feel like winning when the cost is this high. Then why did you do it? Why did you choose revenge over forgiveness? Because some betrayals are unforgivable, Marta. What you did to me, to us, to our marriage, it crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, and I accept it. But Will, I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, despite all the pain and humiliation and consequences, I don't regret loving you. I regret betraying you, but I don't regret the 15 years we had together. Neither do I admitted. But those 15 years are over now. We both have to find a way to move forward. Will you be able to? Move forward, I mean? Or will this bitterness consume you? It was another question I'd been avoiding. The past 6 months had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I'd discovered I was capable of a level of calculation and ruthlessness that surprised even me. I'd systematically destroyed 2 lives without losing a moment's sleep. That kind of behavior left marks on a person's soul. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess I'll find out. Marta stood up and walked around the table to where I was sitting. For a moment, I thought she was going to try to kiss me or make some final plea for reconciliation. Instead, she placed her hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. I hope you find peace, Will. I hope you find someone who deserves your loyalty and never makes you question it. And I hope someday you can forgive me, even if you can never forget what I did. Then she walked upstairs to pack her belongings, leaving me alone in the kitchen where everything had started 6 months ago. 2 hours later, she came back downstairs with 2 suitcases and her purse. She'd left her wedding ring on the counter next to the divorce papers. I'll send someone for the rest of my things next week, she said. Where will you go? Portland, like you suggested. Linda's expecting me, and there's a job waiting at a marketing firm there. It's not much, but it's a start. She walked to the front door, then turned back one last time. Goodbye, Will. Despite everything, I'm glad I got to love you, even if I didn't do it very well. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the house we'd shared for 15 years. I poured myself a bourbon and sat in my leather chair, surrounded by the silence of victory. Jake Turnbull was in prison. Marta was starting over with nothing. I had my house, my money, and my dignity intact. I'd won. Completely, decisively, and without compromise. So why did it feel so much like losing? Outside, it was starting to rain again, and I realized that for the first time in 6 months, I had no idea what came next. My revenge was complete, my marriage was over, and my future was a blank slate. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the empty house and the hollow victory I'd fought so hard to achieve. Some safes should never be opened, I said to the silence. But then again, some people shouldn't have locked them in the first place.